if you want to look for a man in the whole world who is Red Bull in football, that is Jürgen Klopp. He is Red Bull, all they want to stand for.
It's not like he's going there as a kind of prophet of football to say, this is how you need to do things because this is how we did it in Liverpool. He's going, in his own words, to kind of be useful as a sort of uncle to some of these people.
People talked about betrayal, a legacy being tarnished in a way initially. Is that an overreaction? Were people too hysterical, hypocritical even at points?
I'm not saying that it's right for him to come back, but do I think he will come back? I put my money on definitely.
Jürgen Klopp was hired as head of global soccer at Red Bull, a move that sent shockwaves through the football world. The reaction? Divisive. Critics question his motives, his values, and even his legacy. Now, with Klopp having officially started the role, the conversation has shifted. His appointment has been debated, but how has he actually settled in? What has he been working on? Where can he drive real impact in the Red Bull system? And has his legacy truly been tarnished, or was the backlash overblown? I'm your host, Markus Fjørtoft, alongside my co-host, Jan Fjørtoft. And to break this all down, we're joined by Seb Stafford-Bloor, German football correspondent at The Athletic. Seb, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Markus.
Pleasure having you on. I mean, I heard you guys on The Athletic, obviously discussing Bayern. I thought, okay, let's go from one giant to another, from Bayern to Jürgen Klopp. And Jürgen Klopp is such an omnipresent brand, I guess, in German football and what he represents, as I briefly alluded to in the intro. And so I wanted to start with you. You were at his unveiling at the press conference. What stood out for you there as you attended what was a big event in many ways?
Well, between like the Formula One car, the propeller plane, and all sorts of other kind of Red Bull adjacent stuff in the hangar, because that's where the HQ is in Salzburg, just by the airport. God, it was such a strange day, Marcus. There's a lot of talk, and I went there interested to hear what Jürgen Klopp's take on what Jürgen Klopp's job would be. And I left probably more confused than I was when I arrived, because there's a lot of vagary. And there was one line that stood out, and I won't forget this in a while. He was talking about, but when the unveiling took place, he'd spent, I think, 8 days in Leipzig, getting to know people within the Red Bull network and sitting in meetings. And he said he was pretty much solidly in meetings for all that time. And he said, yeah, it was when I came out of those meetings that I thought to myself, yeah, I can be valuable here. I just thought that's God, it'd be great to live like that. If you interviewed for a job and you got the job, you got a good salary, and then 6 months down the line, you have a few sort of introductory meetings at your new company, and you'd be like, yeah, I can be of value here somewhere. And it just spoke to this kind of the very tenuous nature of his role. And I don't know what your guys' take is on it, but I still don't really know what he's doing, because within the course of, I think he spoke for about 15 minutes with Oliver Mintzlaff, and they covered so much ground about how Klopp was, he wanted to talk to Max Verstappen about what it's like to take a corner at 200 kilometers an hour, and he wanted to kind of spend some time with the the guys who fly the wingsuits, and it kind of made my head spin. I think that's what when I came to sit down and write the article after I came back and I sat in the hotel in Salzburg, I didn't really know what I'd seen.
How do you understand his role, that having seen in terms of the immediate reaction and then now what's followed when it's settled a bit? How do you see this evolving, I guess?
As Seb is explaining, we go to this hangar, which is owned by Red Bull, by Didi Mateschitz, who was the founder together with Thailand businessman, Red Bull. But I think the key here is Red Bull, because this is a Red Bull signing. What is Red Bull? Red Bull is maybe the best event company in the world. And by the way, we have some drinks as well. So I think you have to start by, and I can understand the confusion from Seb, because I think when you do the analysis of Klopp to Red Bull, so to say, you have to start the other way around. So they get Klopp, okay, and then we work backwards from there, because they have got maybe if you're going to choose of all ambassadors in the world, I would even say that he was more, he fitted better than Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo because who Klopp is. And I think we should not underestimate this thing that we will probably talk more about, that he came from that background, Marcus, that you had in your introduction. He went to Liverpool, being the new Bill Shankly, understand the red Liverpool, understand the socialism, understand the politics. And this is a fantastic signing for Red Bull. And I think we have to start the other way around. And I think that what Seb described there is absolutely how I think things like this happening, because you sign them up and then you take it from there. And just for them to sign Jürgen Klopp, the biggest name in football, in terms of putting them into a position like that, I think that is already paid out for them, so to say.
People talked about betrayal, a legacy being tarnished in a way initially. Is that an overreaction? Were people too hysterical, hypocritical even at points in terms of that reaction? I remember the Mainz fans, the Dortmund fans, and we can point to the contradictions within that, with obviously Dortmund's commercial deals, or Mainz and what the dealings they've had with certain player incidents over the last year or so. Has that changed, you think, Seb, from what it was at the time to now? Has that settled and Klopp's legacy has kind of been stabilized in a way?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Marcus. I think it's going to depend on who you ask. So within the kind of the people who live in football world, I think, yes, like clearly there are now contradictions between the Jürgen Klopp who was at Borussia Dortmund and Mainz, and the Jürgen Klopp who carried himself in a certain way and was very, very proactive with, for instance, supporters groups at Dortmund. How you reconcile one character with the other is going to be very, very difficult for a lot of people. And you guys know German football well enough, of course, to know, the ultras mind generally not for turning. Once you have a perception of the way someone is behaving, or a set of values, and then that person contradicts themselves, that's kind of that. And so I don't think there's going to be a point at which anybody says, for instance, let alone Jürgen Klopp, anyone says the Red Bull network is a force for good in German football, that's just never, ever going to happen. And so Jürgen Klopp occupying that space, he's in the same position. That being said, I think there are two Jürgen Klopps. When you talk about his popularity and his legacy, I always think about the fact that my mother-in-law likes Jürgen Klopp, couldn't possibly care less about football, but loves Jürgen Klopp because he's this avuncular uncle type. He's, like you guys know, he is all over German television. He is selling Weissbier. He is selling financial planning. He's selling gym equipment. Like, he is that transcendent figure. So Jürgen Klopp does not belong to football in that way anymore. And that's been his great triumph, because I don't think any other coach really, not even Mourinho, not Guardiola, they're very football specific people. I don't think anybody occupies the same space. And I don't think him being employed in this very nebulous way by Red Bull. Firstly, a lot of people don't care about Red Bull's role in football. People who are not football fans don't care about that. It doesn't matter to them. Red Bull to them is, as yet undescribed, they're the events company. They do the cool stuff with the wingsuits and the Formula One, and that's who they are. It's only really match-going football fans that sort of have a problem with the dynamic in German football, and rightly so. I happen to agree with them. But the bigger group of people, it's not going to make an impact. And I think so once you're past that initial very football specific retaliation, which was really fierce on the terraces, of course, but in the paper, some of the things written were brutal. I mean, I read some of the local Dortmund press, and one thing stood out, which is someone saying, this is so awful, it's kind of good for Dortmund, because we've been comparing ourselves to the Klopp era for forever now. And whether it be Lucien Favre, Edin Terzic, Nuri Sahin, whatever, everybody's compared back to him. But now Jürgen Klopp has kind of torn down his own statues by going to Red Bull. So that's all over, which is a very, very melodramatic thing to say, to kind of erase a period of history because of a job decision. So there are two different answers, Marcus. And, I think both will remain the same. People who are in one camp or the other will remain there for good now.
And I think as well that it's important to have that analysis, because Klopp is so much more than football. Yeah. And Klopp is so much more than a German. And Klopp is so much more than a Liverpool manager. In English football, they can't care less. They don't care. Yeah. I mean, if Red Bull comes into Leeds United, they don't care. But in Germany, this is sensible, which is Seb there described. But I think that football fans, this is how we are like. If Dortmund if you come back to Dortmund this summer, I mean, there will be Beatlemania in Dortmund as well, and they will forget that if they win a couple of games. But I think that what is interesting here is not that he went to Red Bull. I think that is the statements that Jürgen Klopp has done over the years, and I'm not saying he is truth to his values. I believe him in that 100%, and he makes that natural. He is a Menschenfänger, einer der to hunt people. You will love him. He's the hugger and all those kind of things. So I think that he's a kind of also a victim of his own statements. If Pep Guardiola got his values as well, but if he took over at Red Bull, it wouldn't be the same reaction because he's never been a front runner for those values. So I think that Jürgen Klopp is bright enough to take that into his mind. I think that also that he somehow missed himself. He somehow missed to be in football. Remember when Pep Guardiola and Thomas Tuchel, they took a year out. Nobody knew where Pep Guardiola was for a year. And then Uli Hoeneß met him in New York and got him to sign for Bayern. He's
playing chess with Garry Kasparov.
Exactly. So I think that, Marcus, goes into the thing that this is Jürgen Klopp, who is the Bill Shankly of the world. But football it's our football. I mean, Bill Shankly, what did he do at the end? Bill Shankly was training around Tranmere Rovers and Everton, the main rivals of Liverpool. This is just human beings, Marcus. And sometimes we over-analyze them when they're doing good, and we over-analyze them when they may be, I say, quote, doing bad in the terms of the fans that Seb were alluding to.
If we are looking ahead then, in terms of him having started his role, what can we say of the job, the involvements he's had already, Seb, in terms of the impact he will have? And we'll get into that in terms of the symbolic versus the tangible impact that he will look to have. But so far, what have we seen from Jürgen Klopp?
Yeah, not a lot of tangible stuff. It's a really interesting point, Marcus, because I think he's been very keen to kind of make this distinction, which is that he's not going around the Red Bull network with a kind of metaphorical toolbox going, right, well, this academy doesn't work, let's change it. So he's been in Brazil. He was planning to go to Japan. I don't know quite if he's been yet, but he said all these clubs are different. So there is no, like, in his mind, there is no one way of doing things, because culturally, obviously, football in Brazil versus football in Japan versus football in Austria, Germany, is all different. And so it's not like he's going there as a kind of prophet of football to say, this is how you need to do things because this is how we did it in Liverpool. He's going, in his own words, to kind of be useful as a sort of, I suppose, and this is my phrasing, not his, to kind of be an uncle to some of these people. I dare say also, we haven't brought this up yet, but Jan touched on the value of Jürgen Klopp. There's a huge value in Jürgen Klopp just being in a room somewhere. If you're a commercial director, or if you're trying to sign a new player, or if you're trying to attract a new coach, and can you imagine if you're in Japan and you're trying to rebuild this third division football club, and you've got a new signing who, may be coming, or, a new academy director, and you bring Jürgen Klopp into that room? Doesn't even need to say anything, does he? It's like a tacit endorsement. Like, this is a guy who's on your side. You can call him up, send him an email, or don't, but he is a resource for you to use. I think that's the way to characterize what he does at the moment. There's no job description. There's not like, go and teach this guy how to install gegenpressing in Japan. It's not going to be that job. It's you're a friendly face. You're someone that's been around. You have this value that we can convert into a sponsorship agreement or a transfer. It's that kind of stuff, which is really hard to nail down and really unsatisfying to talk about, because there's no kind of case studies. But I think that's what it will look like over the next couple of years.
But now it's only been 2 months. I mean, the first thing he had to settle, and he said, "No, I didn't have anything to do with that." That was Leinders leaving his job at Salzburg, and they've been doing terrible. I mean, I played in the Austrian league, so I followed them quite closely. They've been terrible, and they had to change the coach. And the local paper was very clear that Jürgen Klopp didn't have anything to do with that. Okay, well. And now his good friend Marco Rose is struggling in Leipzig.
Also in trouble,
Also in trouble. Can absolutely be out of Champions League for next season. That is terrible for the Red Bull kind of idea. So yes, I think that the description of his role, what Seb is doing, is something that I think Klopp would like to have. But we also do, from the moment he signed for Red Bull, he will be the people's responsible for what Red Bull is doing or not doing. And I think you will have a balance at one point. Because we know the German press, if Marco Rose gets more under pressure, will they say, yeah, can he do as Rangnick? Because Ralf Rangnick, you compare it with Ralf Rangnick, he more or less had this, well, he was more hands-on, but he still had this libero kind of coaching, kind of ambassador role of the whole Red Bull football. He basically made it. And he came in, did some small jobs here and there, and I just hope for Jürgen Klopp. I wouldn't like to see him doing Leipzig next season, because I think that he should be in this role now for a couple of years and see how much he misses football. We miss him. Don't seem that they're missing him in Liverpool, but I will say that a part of the success that Liverpool is having this season is the legacy of Jürgen Klopp. But it's going to be interesting, Marcus, because whatever Red Bull is doing, if they lose against Hartberg in Austria, he is a part of that. If Leipzig can't win at home, he is a part of it. So I don't think he will be only flying around, all metaphorically, because I think that at one point, Red Bull is also competitive. So they don't just to have people there for fun.
It's interesting you bring that up, Jan, because actually, like Minslav in the press conference this is a different type of Minslav to one I've seen before, where he talked about winning, and he talked about the importance of winning in relation to football. Because I think previously we've all got used to the idea, certainly in Germany, that if RB finish third, good season, right? Whereas now I think the mood is starting to shift. But also, like Christian Falk from Bild asked in the press conference, what happens if Marco Rose loses his job? Are you going to be on the touchline? And Klopp said categorically, I will never coach a Red Bull football team, which is all very, very well and good. But like you say, Jan, like as soon as if Rose was to go tomorrow, you know exactly what the front page of Bild is going to be, or Kicker, or El Freunde. It's going to be, hey, you've got one of the greatest coaches of his generation sitting there. Just plug him in for 6 months. So I don't know how that situation resolves itself, but he's kind of made a rod for his own back in a way, because he can't do that. He can't just be dropped in to do it. And I think in his mind, I think his coaching years are finished. Like, I think he feels that he's kind of transcended the game in a way, and that his sort of time in the technical area, he's got nothing else that he wants to do. And so that will be really interesting. The first time there's particularly in Leipzig, the first time there's a coaching change there, I'd be very, very interesting to see what happens.
And just short, Marcus, just to add to that, remember, is really two kind of philosophies meeting up, because you have the club philosophy and you have all the coaches that will be the club coaches. So they follow him. We saw Farke last night, Leeds United beating my former club, Sheffield United. That is one. But the Red Bull also got a lot of coaches around who has kind of been in there, been out there. So this like a family. And my favorite manager, Markus Krösche, is of course also from the Red Bull school. There's Adi Hütter. There's so many Glasner. They've all been around. So it's going to be a hell of a job for Jürgen Klopp to kind of juggle this. But again, fantastic signing for Red Bull. And remember, Red Bull is also in a transition, because Mateschitz, who was the founder, died, and Oliver Minslav came in, and there are three people sharing the whole company now, so to say, in terms of responsible. And Oliver Minslav, who made his trade by Leipzig and so on, he is now head of all entertainment, all sport, or Formula One, TV, Servus TV. And so it's an interesting organization, Marcus.
Yeah, and it is within this backdrop that Klopp enters, because you alluded to it. But in terms of RB Leipzig that are struggling in the Bundesliga, underperforming, and they have that last lifeline of the cup, and whether that will be enough for us or not is we await to see. Red Bull Salzburg fourth in the Austrian Bundesliga were as low as 6 or 7 at a point. You had Bragantino in Brazil. You have then with the minority stakes in Paris FC and the minority stakes in Leeds United as well. And it is interesting, Seb, in terms of the overall impact, because maybe we underestimate the sheer impact of him just being there, right? And in terms of that visceral effect, but then also organizationally, it is one in which there are a lot of, I guess, authoritative or player or manager, so to speak, with good credibility within the system. There are also those occupying technical roles, sporting director roles, head of sport roles at each club. Mario Gomez has a technical director role, which is more of a global role as well. So fitting it within that will be interesting from Klopp, and whether that, as you alluded to as well, is it a Rangnick role in which you will have a direct influence on the philosophy of the organization as well. But I guess those answers, it seems like Klopp is trying to figure out the same way we are trying to figure out.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Because I think when I think of Rangnick, I think of a much more literal form of architect. Like Rangnick wanted control of everything, like from the way the club functioned, the executive level, to the style of football played, to the type of players scouted and recruited in. Whereas I think the way when we talk about that big network of that sort of family of Red Bull employees, obviously in the first instance we're talking about coaches, the guys that we see on a regular basis, but it also includes all the kind of the support staff. And I think that's a really interesting role for Klopp potentially. And so how can he apply his experiences at Dortmund and his experiences at Liverpool? So in those two examples, you have two quite different forms of club. So how should the medical department work? How should your data department function with your recruiting staff, the guys actually responsible for negotiating? I think you can, with Klopp's help, not solely with Klopp's help, but with his input, you can help to train an entire new generation of staff in all of those different positions. So, your nutritionist at RB Salzburg can, spend some time in Bragantino, because he knows with Jürgen Klopp's input about what worked at Liverpool, what do you need as a first team coach? How should you communicate? If you're a data scientist, how should you communicate with a head of recruitment so that your ideas are actually taken on board? These tiny little things are definitely things that he can give input into, and not necessarily rule in the same way that Rangnick would, because I imagine Rangnick, certainly with RB and at Hoffenheim, it's a bit more of this is how we should do it. Whereas I think that Klopp made a distinction during his press conference where he said he will never be someone, as paraphrasing, he'll never be someone who stands in a room and tells people what to do. He will just be a voice in the conversation in that room. And I think that's a really good way of portraying it. And yeah, these little subtle effects, there's tremendous value that he can add without anyone necessarily knowing that he's added it. Does that make sense? Because a lot of these situations occur, behind the veil, right?
It's a bit like describing what a consultant does as well. There is,
100%,
it's a bit vague,
100%,
and you can't really define unless you're in the room.
Can't price it.
Yes,
absolutely,
exactly.
absolutely.
And Darren, any further thoughts before we get towards the end here? Because I am curious as to what impact this has touched upon as well in terms of what this has to say for his managerial career. But it is a longer term contract he has signed with the Red Bull organization as well. Is it a matter of him just wanting that break before he maybe has one last stint at the much spoken about Germany job?
Yeah, but if I can start with that, I think that first of all, it's important to see that if you want to look for a man in the whole world who is Red Bull in football, that is Jürgen Klopp. He is Red Bull, all they want to stand for, which is very important. That is point 2. If we can see him back, Marcus, I love my history. I love to read history. The last thing I did on Saturday, I had a problem. Should I watch Match of the Day or should I share a documentary of Fleetwood Mac? Fleetwood Mac is and
Fleetwood
was
Mac documentary, Jan. Come on now.
Exactly.
You can record Match of the Day.
yeah, exactly. But I was in a hotel room and I'm technical a bit apart. But anyway, so Fleetwood Mac, they got a comeback. They all get a comeback. Name me one artist in entertainment who never did a comeback. I have never. There's probably one. And probably people say, yeah, you forgot this and that.
Kate Bush.
Beatles,
Yeah.
but Paul McCartney made the Wings.
Led Zeppelin, although they did that one-off, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
One-off.
Okay.
It was a one-off. They can't resist the one-off, can they?
Exactly.
Ever?
They stated for one night only. You can leave your hat on and all that kind of thing. So I think that Jürgen Klopp, as I know him, as a guy, I think he loves his life now. He would love to fly around and being that person that Seb so eloquently described, because I think that is the role he wants to do. But sometimes you kind of miss that thing. I've had it as well. I no comparison, but I was at Lillestrøm. I did that after my career. I was the manager of Lillestrøm. I said I will never do this again. Well, down the road, 10, 12 years, I did the thing with the national team. And after 3 years, I was thinking, should I just sit in my room waiting for the next meeting? I'm 52 years of age. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying that it's right for him to come back, but do I think he will come back? I put my money on definitely. There's something will happen. Maybe suddenly the Bayern job is something happening there. Nagelsmann till 2026, yes. And well, how do they do there? Who are you going to call? Not Ghostbusters. You will always call Jürgen Klopp. And maybe in that moment, he's bored by going with private jet, seeing different people, playing paddle, and then he's back in the business for one night only.
Seb, what do you make of it all?
I can't see him ever returning to club football. I think the kind of the rhythms of it, that every day on the training pitch, I think that part of his life is done. I think I agree with Jan in the sense that if, for instance, let's say that Germany win the 2026 World Cup with Julian Nagelsmann, what's the point in Julian Nagelsmann staying there beyond that? It's complete international football. Yeah, European Championship, etc. But it's not the World Cup. You've done it. You've reached the pinnacle. Julian Nagelsmann will still be a very young man by then. You know, clearly, I think his contract now runs until 2028. He did that extension a couple of months ago. And so you could see him migrating back into club football, and then the DFB needing a short-term solution heading into a European Championship potentially. I can see that. I think that the mixture of this new life, his home in Mallorca, his paddle tennis, I think that at this stage of life, given what he has contributed at Dortmund and at Liverpool, and given the nature of those two jobs and how pressurized they were and how demanding they were, I think it's done at club football level. I hope not, because I always enjoyed watching his teams. I think he's a fascinating character, but I can't see it. I can see him coaching Germany one day, because I think that's a hell of a thing to turn down if that opportunity comes up. In the same way with Nagelsmann, like who would have thought, Nagelsmann at this stage of his career would have been seduced by what national football is, where he saw the response during the Euros and the way that the country clamored around the national team and kind of grew back towards it and thought, I'm going to extend my contract because this is an incredible privilege to coach my country. And it would be the same for Klopp. Of course it would. And it's the one thing missing from his CV as well.
And just make clear how popular Klopp is in Germany. If he wanted to be because they had an election on Sunday and Merz was the chancellor. If Klopp were going for it, he would have won the election.
Yes.
So I think that at the one stage,
because everyone else is so awful, Jan.
Exactly. That is another.
There's no one to vote for.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. Because I think that I'm with you in terms of clubs. But there are two jobs that is hard to go down, because you will always ask yourself, what could I have done with Bayern? Because that is like the German thing. It's so hard to explain to English people when a Schalke player or a Dortmund player or a Werder Bremen player challenge you for Bayern, and they still end up in Bayern. So let's see, Marcus, Bayern or Germany or Red Bull, but I think he will stay for Red Bull at least a couple of more years.
It is the two institutions in Germany that captures everyone's imagination. It is Bayern. It is the German national team. and only time will tell. But for now, I think the discussion is settled. Nagelsmann a contract till 2028, and Klopp with a 5-year contract as well. We'll see. It's been a pleasure to have you on, Seb. Truly, first time. We'll try to make that a second time soon enough as well. But for now, gentlemen, thank you very much, and auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.